Greetings to all Africans. This is King H, the radical Pan-African activist from Ambazonia, aka Ambasbe, the 56th nation of the African Union. The African Union has no other choice but to accept the fact that Ambazonia is a nation and must respect the sovereignty of Ambazonia. And Republic of Cameroon, the citizens of Republic of Cameroon and the government of Republic of Cameroon has no other choice but to respect the sovereignty and the independence of Ambazonia. That's how we can coexist as two separate nations. Like it or not, it's just a fact. They just have to accept it. But this is a discussion that I want to have today. It has to do with the retirement age in France and how the citizens of France are fighting against the government of France, fighting against Macron, who is trying to increase the age of retirement in France from 62 to 64. But how is this retirement age connected to French African nation in West Africa and Central Africa? This is what I want to discuss. If you like what you're hearing, like it, share it to your friends, and let's go. The retirement age in France is 62, and the French President Macron, who has visited many African nations of recent, wants to change it from 62 to 64, but he's having some intense debate, intense fighting with his citizens, or the citizens are fighting against him increasing the age from 62 to 64. There have been many protests. And let's look at the retirement ages in Germany, Italy, US, and many other European nations. Germany, the retirement age in Germany is 65.6, Italy 67, US 67, most of Europe is 65 plus, but only in France that is 62. The retirement age is 62, and how has this been sustained in the past and continues to be sustained in the future? Because of many colonies that France has in Africa, in Central and West African nations, many colonies that they depend on to sustain, to replenish their treasury so that they can pay their citizens to retire at the age of 62. But that is not sustainable anymore. And one of the reasons it's not sustainable is because other nations in Africa are fighting against it. And all French African nations in Central in West and Central Africa needs to fight against this. Because if we do successfully win this, then our finances will not be put in the treasury of France, which is being used to pay the citizens of France to retire at the age of 62. In other words, your money in West Africa, in Central Africa, that is being put in the treasury of France is used to pay the citizens of France to retire at the age of 62. But that system is not longer sustainable, which is why the president of France is trying hard to increase the retirement age to 64. Actually, he wants to increase to 65, but he's able to do it at the age of 64, which is still not comparable to the age of retirement age in Germany, Italy, or US, because the retirement age in Germany is 65.6, but they're gonna increase to 64, and the citizens are fighting and tearing down France just because of that. So I want to say this to many French West African nations and many French Central African nations that we need to stop putting our our money, our finances in the treasury of France. Countries like Cameroon, Central African Republic, Congo, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, which are Central African nations that put their money in the treasury of France. That money is being used to pay the citizens of France to retire in early age. Meanwhile, many citizens of Central African, Central Africa, many citizens of Central African, in French Central Africa are, they don't have the money to sustain themselves. They are poor, wretched. Meanwhile, the money is being put in French African treasury, which is being used by France. So we need to cut that link. Central African region nations need to cut that link. Countries that are in Central Africa that put their money in treasury in France need to cut that link. West African nations that put their treasury in France need to cut that link, because that money is being used in France, sustain France, and our people will suffer in the long run. So that's one thing we need to do. Just like you see, Central African Republic, the nation of Central African Republic has decided not to longer work with France, so which means Central African Republic needs to stop putting their money in the treasury of France, because now they are working with Russia. This has to do with the geopolitical power that is happening. There are two groups when it comes to global geopolitics. And one group has to do with Russia and China, and the other group has to do with US, European Union, G7, and you could also put the UN, because the UN just goes with who has the power, and who has the power is US, G7, but that power is being fought. The geopolitical power is being fought by Russia, China, Iran, and even Saudi Arabia is now part of Russia, China, because they're working together. Saudi Arabia used to be part of the US pact, but because Saudi Arabia knows that they cannot grow, they can grow more with aligning themselves with US and the European Union, G7, they decided to work with who? Russia, China, and even, making friends with their most rival enemy, Iran, making peace. China made peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and now they are now friends making money. But when they were under the leadership of US, they were rivals fighting each other. So there are two pacts that's going on. And in that two pacts, France doesn't really belong in neither. France doesn't belong in with the US pact, with the US geopolitical power. And because of that, well, their geopolitical power is weakening. So French African nation in Central Africa need to get out from France hegemony, and French African nation in West Africa also need to get out and find ways to sustain themselves without being under France, because if they continue to be under France, then they will never grow, because France doesn't have the geopolitical power to sustain France self. So why be under a wreckage train? Why try to survive with a train that is already being destroyed? Get out. Take your money out of the treasury of France, put it in Africa, or put it somewhere else beside France's treasury, because that money is being used to sustain French citizens who want to retire at the age of 62. And the French government is trying to increase the retirement age to 64, and they turn down their own country, which is actually good for me. I actually like the fact that they turn down their own country. It makes French African nations to stand up and fight against the government, who support themselves by supporting France, because France can support them. But France cannot support France itself. So how is France going to support the French African nations in West and Central Africa? Need to get out just like just like Mali is getting out. Need to get out just like Central African Republic is getting out. You know, countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea Bissau, Benin, Togo, they need to get out from putting their money in the French treasury, because they're not gonna get anything, because they're not getting anything out of it. France is gonna use it because France needs it. France needs to sustain their own people. And we need to understand how geopolitics happen. Who controls what? There's a strong negative pull from two opposite sides, which is China, Russia against US, and the G7, the United Nations, which is also part of that. They are fighting to have complete power. And China, Russia, with its own allies, are also fighting to sustain themselves. So French African nations also need to fight to sustain themselves by creating and forming alliance with other nations in Africa and across the world. BRICS is on the rise. Other nations are joining the BRICS, but the leadership of Central and West African nations that are putting money in the treasury of France need to stop doing that, because that only sustains the growth of France. It doesn't sustain the growth of French African nation in West and Central Africa. We need to look at how politics is being played. There's a tic-tac-toe political game that is going on. And if we understand the tic-tac-toe political games that is going on in the global world, then we'll be able to make moves that would help change and propel Africa to another new level. Africans need to stop being scared of politics. Politics is life. Politics is a daily thing. Politics is what how you buy your gasoline and everything. It affects everything in life. And we need to stop being afraid of politics. We need to stop being afraid of speaking truth to our politicians, even if they have to kill us. Speak the truth. Because Central African nations that put money in the treasury of France need to stop putting money in the treasury of France, and need to find ways to put money in the treasury of Africa, in the continent of Africa, so that way it will be used for the people of Africa and the growth of Africa. As a matter of fact, we need to create a West African treasury where we can put our money in the West African treasury, a Central African treasury where we can put our money in the Central African treasury, instead of taking that money and put it in France, where the citizens of France benefit because they retire at a young age, 62, when other nations are retiring 65, 67, even up to 70. France are retiring at a young age, enjoying the resources, because we take our money in Central and West African French countries to put money in the treasury of France, and the citizens of France benefit. And how do the citizens of France treat Africans? With disdain, with hatred. The money we put in the treasury of France is still being used against Africans. So we need to stop doing that. This is King Echu. Till next time, the radical Pan-African activist.